Happy bye week, Mountaineer Nation. Carson Fox here with you on Fox on West Virginia Mountaineer Sports. We don't have to deal with the stress Virginia anxiety of a Saturday of West Virginia football today. So, with it being bye week number one, I wanted to take a moment and go a little bit different because I think this is applicable from this point in time moving forward for the 2024 season, rather than go with what are some of the traditional storylines that I could pursue for this week. I've been thinking I was really thinking hard about it Sunday after the recap of the Kansas game, and it wasn't until I saw the Monday press conference from Neal Brown that I really had the inspiration. Wanted to do a little bit of, homework, really think this one through before I brought this video to you. So here on your Saturday, instead of getting a game, I want to talk about the number one thing that I think that has to change for West Virginia to have a successful season, one that could still potentially challenge for a Big 12 championship or, give West Virginia's best fighting shot here over the course of October and through November and potentially save Neal Brown's job. Some of the storylines I feel like that are always, able to be talked about is like, what does West Virginia need to do during this bye week to have a good season? Or, let's take a, block of this 4-game season and do not a quarter poll now at this point in time, it's a third poll, and evaluate how West Virginia's done so far. Well, to just recap that really quickly, it's pretty simple. Defensively, I feel like with the pressure that they're creating, predominantly by TJ Jackson, but also Tyron Bradley getting involved, Josiah Trotter being the player that we potentially, that we thought preseason could be, being one of the best on the defensive front, that this defensive front is the one area that it's kind of overachieving. The defensive secondary, I don't know how can be fixed other than more continuity, more time to play together. Having watched West Virginia for, the bulk of the majority of my life, is whenever West Virginia has a team that has terrible pass defense, that it doesn't figure itself out. It goes really one of two ways. I can think back to 2006 or 2012 especially. 2013 was a complete mess in and of itself, but like 2021 after the really good 2020 season, or even 2019 really when the cupboard was bare, but more so 2022 with Rashad Ajayi and Wesley McCormick. And that's unfortunately what I feel like is that West Virginia can continue to try out this bullpen, as Jordan Leslie and Neal Brown have called it, of different cornerbacks to try. Maybe Aubrey Burks comes back healthy. Maybe Jordan Leslie tries some things differently with a 3-4 scheme, as I've been talking about all off season and into this season. Do some things differently with their safeties, getting Jaheim Joseph involved, but continuing to try and use Rodney Gallagher in creative ways, perhaps at nickelback. It's going to be, I love this term I use at work before. You're building a plane as you're flying it. And that is how this makeshift defense is going to be if Garnet Hollis Jr. isn't the player that everyone from the general manager, Drew Fabianich, Neal Brown, so on and so forth, believed in could be West Virginia's cornerback one. And then, it's a figure it out at cornerback two. Can they find two guys? So where I wanted to go with this video today is if West Virginia is not going to be able to figure it out defensively, and as we talked about after the Pitt game and then especially the Kansas game, now really starts the murderer's row of the 2024 schedule with Oklahoma State next week, Iowa State, Kansas State, Arizona. I know they get another bye week, and they still have who is coming on strong, it seems like, just at this point in the season, still a little too early to tell, being UCF. Like, there's going to be a lot to play for. More ranked opponents on the schedule, an opportunity for West Virginia to try and build what resume it can for the college football playoff, but without that automatic qualifying bid to get to the playoff. They're not going to get as an at-large. So it's got to be Big 12 champion or bust. And you can pad their resume with a whole bunch of different ranked wins. So that's going to help itself out. So where I wanted to go with this video, taking a look at the Neal Brown press conference from Monday, is that West Virginia is going to have to fight fire with fire in this conference going down the stretch and score more points. That's at the end of the day. If your defense, can't hold opponents under 30, maybe even 35, you're going to have to go the old Dana Holgorsen route, fight fire with fire, and try and outscore opponents. And right now, West Virginia is not doing that. And I question the ability or the gall and the stones of Neal Brown, of the way that he coaches offense, in particularly against teams of comparable skill level and talent, if West Virginia has the capacity to do so in a way in which I feel like you have more of a probability to win than, trying to win at the very end. Like, for example, to kind of give you an example of context, like so many cases and points in time over Neal Brown's career at West Virginia is that he's tried to win close rather than go full, like Fury, the movie with Brad Pitt and from World War II, trying to throw everything that you've got at your opponent, raise hell and attack opponents vertically downfield. Instead, working for the time of possession, slow and methodical, be the tortoise instead of the hare, the anti-Dana Holgorsen. And I just don't think that's going to work at this point in time. And with that case, that could potentially, with this defense, rack up the kind of losses that we saw in 2022. That would be the end of Neal Brown, in my opinion, at West Virginia. And you're spoiling the senior season of Garrett Green, the quarterback. So, very interesting. And, here's some numbers to prove this. I looked at the numbers of wins that West Virginia has had by, as people on Twitter love to say, win by at least two touchdowns. So 14 points. I took that 14-point threshold against Power 5 opponents. I'm not going to conclude in FCS opponents, and I'm not going to include G5, especially over the last 20 years as that gray area has kind of gotten hairy between the FCS, the G5, now what is the P4, so it's really G6. And I went back and found these numbers. So 6th season now. I know it's not apples to apples given the number of years that the previous coaches coached at West Virginia, but at least for Neal Brown's case, this can kind of give you a scale. That Neal Brown coached West Virginia teams have won against Power 5 opponents by 14 points or more. Neal Brown's done that 8 times. Dana Holgorsen did that 21 times. And Rich Rodriguez coached West Virginia teams. If you count the 08 Fiesta Bowl, which, was coached by Bill Stewart, but with all of Rich Rodriguez's players and the same scheme, I'll count that toward it. It's only going to make up a difference of 1. Rich Rodriguez had 26. So again, Rod, 26, Dana, 21, Neal Brown, 8. That's what I mean, is that it seems as if more times than not that what Neal Brown wants to do whenever he coaches offense is try and win in the fourth quarter, not having the coaching and calling a game as if you don't have the capacity to blow an opponent out. And I think that West Virginia is now out of excuses. Now that I know that West Virginia's played 3 out of 4 opponents, again, the Power 4 for this 2024 schedule. But now that Oklahoma and Texas are out of the league, and considering that this league has taken a prestige drop because of those two, elites are not in the conference anymore, that there's no excuses, that you cannot coach and play to do this. Utah's a good team, good program. I chronicled this with Oklahoma State last year in a video in which I talked about how starting this year, there would kind of be a crab pot of teams trying to work their way up the mountain to eventually take the pinnacle and run with this conference as the stalwart program. And right now, I have to feel as if Utah, Oklahoma State, Kansas State still, they are right there, and West Virginia is looking up and not, on its trust the climb. Are we, like Sisyphus? Are we pushing the rock up the hill only to continue to see it slide down or work its way back, and we're never going to get there? And I think after that backyard brawl loss, that fans like myself and so many others who are outspoken across social media have felt that way because West Virginia's done it before. That, say what you want to say about Dana Holgorsen perhaps overachieving with Texas in this conference. I know never having beaten Oklahoma toward that 21 statistic right there. Rich Rodriguez predominantly coaching through the Big East, which kind of took us perhaps a step back when Virginia Tech, Miami, and Boston College left the conference after the 2004 season, and then especially after, looking toward what the conference was whenever West Virginia and Syracuse and Pitt, and Louisville too left for the ACC and Big 12 respectively. But rather than going down that rabbit hole, what I want to talk about today came up in this press conference, and you can see 33 minutes. I know there was some banter back and forth with the West Virginia media during this press conference, but having heard enough Neal Brown press conferences, and I'll reiterate again for this video, is that you kind of have to wade through the BS, not necessarily BS, but the stuff that really doesn't drive any impact, really doesn't teach you anything, really doesn't tell you anything, kind of spoken within generalities. You have to read between the lines here, and I want to give you some added context. So the question came up, and I feel like this was the most important question asked, and then I'll kind of unpack it with some other pieces that I found from this video, was the question asked about, well, if you're so successful running the 2-minute offense with Garrett Green as your quarterback, why don't you just run that all game? And you heard this, if you're a Pittsburgh Steelers fan, you heard this a lot during the later years of Ben Roethlisberger dealing with Randy Fichtner as the offensive coordinator, and then especially Matt Canada, and that it seemed like the Steelers' offense was so successful when Ben Roethlisberger was getting up to the line of scrimmage, calling a play at the line of scrimmage, and go, 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 all systems go, and the Steelers would score points. So apples to apples situation kind of here is that West Virginia under Garrett Green at quarterback has been extremely successful running a 2-minute offense. You can think back to the Houston game last year, or this past week against Kansas. And I may give you the response from what Neal Brown has to say here.
But I think that going back to what John was asking is what we did on Saturday always going to be the answer? I would say probably not. But on Saturday it was the best answer because we just spread them out and we got some guys in some favorable one-on-ones and we opened up a lot of running lanes for him when he wanted to pull down and run.
In that regard, you said this is hard to do after the game, but is it tempting not to just spread it out and run 2-minute all the time, considering the success you have with that when you do it?
So if you do that all the time, you make it really, really hard on your defense, first of all. Okay. The second thing is if you're going to do that all the time, then people are working that all the time. Mm-hmm. When people are going to line up and play us, that's not the first thing they're working on. They're working on, all right, how they're going to play our run game concepts and how they're going to play the quarterback run stuff. That's the first things they're thinking about. And then how do you stop shot plays? That's what people that line up and play us right now are. Now, they probably get to the 2-minute stuff later in the week, but at the very start, they're going to go, all right, how are we going to limit the run game? Like, how are we going to play all the quarterback stuff? And then how do we keep the ball in front of us on shot plays? Without a doubt, that's what people are thinking about. And so if you do that all the time, then people, because there's some cat and mouse stuff that you can do that makes it really hard. And then you're putting your O-line in a really tough spot. Yeah.
All right, so I'll pause him there. So Neal Brown's thought process here, let's unpack that a little bit. One, that puts pressure on your defense to have to play more snaps. And that's true. That's obviously the opposite side of the coin to the Rich Rodriguez, Chip Kelly-esque offenses of the 2000s and even into the early 2010s. Before then, the run-pass RPO option became really ubiquitous, and the evolution of the spread read option involving the pass now on top of that. But what I have to say with that is, so what? It just goes counter to the cuts against the grain, counter to what Neal Brown wants to experience within a game. And to know your opponent so well, nameless, faceless opponent, to know that that opponent can scheme for you that well, then why are you playing into their hands? That is, I guess, the conundrum or reason why a guy like Neal Brown gets paid millions of dollars and I'm just a fan. I'm just a guy who talks about it on the internet. And the quarterback or the couch quarterbacks are always right. Hindsight's 20/20, and always making the coaches look bad because they have that benefit of the doubt in hindsight of what things happen, good or bad. But needless to say is, I think that's what can make for good and great, or even average to good, offensive play callers. And the difference in the where good teams can be great in winning conference championships and going to college football playoffs. And that's what Neal Brown has yet to do. I mean, perfect example, I feel like, is the new Bill Belichick-led Patriots team, Tom Brady's last year, that they go on that amazing Super Bowl run against the LA Rams, just continue to grind and run the ball, understanding that opponents in today's day and age of the NFL want to play more of a finesse basketball, play in space type of football. And instead, that whole season, especially there toward the end of the season, they went ground. They went ground and pound. They realized that they could own time of possession, run clock, and run down your throat, and that's how they could win because they had a successful defense. So that's what I feel like Neal Brown can apply because he finally has the talent at multiple different skill positions and his offensive line to be able to do so. And we talked about this during the offseason of that Neal Brown and his staff felt so comfortable with the starters, that they could do some things differently than he had at any point in time in his career. It really seemed to come to fruition in the 2023 season, and we saw that more or less play out last year. So you thought that West Virginia could pick up where it left off after the end of the Duke's Mayo Bowl, build upon that because you had, you're replacing Zach Frazier, you're replacing Doug Nestor, but for the most part, you were bringing back Eric Green. You were bringing back Cole Taylor. You were bringing back all your running backs. You have 4 across the offensive line. 5 guys across your offensive line who are in their 4th years in the program or older. And you had so many guys in the receiving corps who got experience last year, predominantly as freshmen or redshirt freshmen, but you added in a Jaden Bray, you added in a Justin Robinson. There should have been no excuses as to why West Virginia started out offensively so slow against Penn State, and then against Pitt, so slow in the first half, and then against Kansas last week had the turnover issues. And it wasn't, and before the 4 minutes left in the game, West Virginia had only scored 17 points. So then when you flick a switch and you're able to score over half of what you had previously had in 4 minutes, it's only naturally that fans like myself question where is your thought process going into a game. It doesn't matter the opponent. What matters is your philosophy. What matters is your overall schematics, how you want to play a game, and run an offense. And I know that Neal Brown has his calling card to his offense over 6 years has been a lot of window dressing and a lot of motion pre-snap. And that's to help the quarterback identify coverages, whether it's man, whether it's zone, rather to help out in that regard. It uses way too much clock pre-snap. And at the end of the day, can you accomplish the same things doing it faster? And for anyone, especially who's either coached against or, if you're just a fan like me and play a lot of video games, playing against a spread up tempo team is harder to in game deal with, because you have to deal with the substitution factor. You wear your opposing defenses out. And how many times have we seen West Virginia have success up tempo? I talked about this a lot throughout my videos last year, and immediately in the next game, West Virginia goes away from it. So that's why I can't go into this bye week and be like, bam, here we go. The bye week is at a perfect time. They can get healthy for, all the injuries that they sustained against Kansas. And they're going to have this new identity and, get right offensively. It starts with the head coach. It starts with, do you come in with you can never question that about Dana Holgorsen and his coaching. And where I thought that maybe Neal Brown could tamper that down a little bit was sometimes the recklessness with which he called games. If you go back and you watch the Oklahoma game in 2018, it's going to put you through hell watching that. But you could just see where there were points in time in that game, I think, going to... I forget the second string tight end that year's name. Went for it on fourth down instead of taking the points. But now Neal Brown's doing that. Now in 2 games, Penn State and last week against Kansas, West Virginia is trying to pull out his inner Dana Holgorsen and not kick field goals in the first quarter or early second quarter to take points and wanting to play with leads. That's where I think he's missing the point there. Whereas the tempo, the style, the offense, he doesn't want to coach. And I'll go back into this press conference where he talks about, the question came up, I can't believe this was asked, but this is a really good question. I feel like going into a bye week to be able to talk about it, is his evolution as a play caller.
Each game's different, of how you call it. I think some of it has to do with your personnel, some of it has to do with the defensive personnel. There's a lot more to think through when you're the head coach calling the game, because you know kind of what your strengths and weaknesses are on defense as well. Am I different than when I was a coordinator? Probably, just because I'm thinking more from a whole team perspective, and I'm older. I think you get a little wiser the older you get most of the time. You can tell me better than that, but most of the time. Most of the time. So I don't know if that answers you, but that's how we're different. And we're different probably because what we have personnel wise. I don't know if it's different because anything philosophically. It's just we're doing what gives our guys the best opportunity to execute right now.
I don't buy that. I don't, because we've seen, and I think this came to a head in the Pitt game at points in time. It started even going back to the spring game, I feel like, of what I saw, the body language of Garrett Green during that spring game and his wide. I know it was played as a glorified 7-on-7, because if the pass rush got to him and touched him, that was counted as a sack, and that's how he's able to use his skill set best. And I'll talk more about that. But wide receivers not creating separation, and is that whether to do with the play calls, and this translates now to the regular season? Does that have to do with the play calls and the way that Neal Brown is scheming the offensive game plan, or is it the inability for these wide receivers to create separation? That is what I can't necessarily lock down. It's hard to watch. If unless you have a bird's eye view of a game, and if you have higher seats and saw at that Kansas game, or you had higher seats at the Backyard Brawl and are able to tell me, I'd love to know. I had a lower sight line for the Backyard Brawl, so it was hard to see. I haven't gone back and watched that game because it's still just eating me up inside. But even the Kansas game, because you don't get the same kind of Madden or NCAA view, like a video game view of how these wide receivers are getting in and out of their routes, it's harder to tell from a sideline to sideline view that you get from a broadcast cam. So I'd love to know from Mountaineer Nation of, are these wide receivers, tight end included, creating that separation? Or is the scheme, and the play calls just so predictable that these wide receivers are being covered because what Neal Brown calls plays into the hands of what the defense is doing? What I mean by that, like taking that a step further, is that we know, Neal Brown even knows this because he's talked about it. Narduzzi and a Pitt-led defense is very similar to a Mike Gundy-led philosophical defense. So what West Virginia is going to experience next week against Oklahoma State going to be very similar to what West Virginia faced against Pitt. And that is that they like big-bodied, long-armed cornerbacks who beat the crap out of your receivers, and they play press man coverage with very little room over the top, and they dare opposing defenses to go deep on you. So, knowing that and knowing how, some of those things don't change, how's Neal Brown going to call that game? I bet you, because he's already spoken to it about how he thinks defenses play him, is that he's going to try and want to run the football, own time of possession, and, again, try and win it in the fourth quarter. And that is what you want to just hit your head against a wall when the losses mount up, especially against comparable opponents, is because then it doesn't come down to talent. It comes down to coaching. And when it's the definition of insanity is doing the same things over and over again and expecting different results, is if it doesn't work, change it. And like that, the adjustments sometimes are too little too late. And we almost saw that. We saw that in the Pitt game, and we saw that almost in the Kansas game. And it took a quarterback, a fifth-year senior quarterback that Neal Brown can't pull for a Jarrett Deggy or a JT Daniels and sit him on the bench like he did in 2021 and 2022 and say, we're going with another option, with someone who plays within my system, my too conservative, but you do what I say system, to go out there and make plays. And that's what I think, like, it came to a head with Garrett Green on last Saturday against Kansas, and he was saying, we're not going to lose this game. I'm going to put it on my shoulders. I'm going to go out there and make plays because what we're calling just doesn't make sense. It doesn't, pan out. And again, I've heard some criticism here and there about Green's, ability to read the field, some missed receivers that he had in that Pitt game, and perhaps also as well in this Kansas game. So I don't want to lather it on too thick on Neal Brown because, again, Green's already at his interception total from 2023, and we're only 4 games into this season. But is that because he's pressing, trying to make plays like a Geno Smith of 2012, knowing his defense can't back him up, can't stop a nosebleed, so I have to score touchdowns every single time I try and, enter the field, and what my head coach just isn't working against this defense, and I can see it, so then he's like, I'm going to do it myself. And we saw that in the second quarter against Albany, and now we saw it. Saw it against Pitt. Now we saw it against Kansas. Let's get into it finally and talk about Garrett Green. So first, I'm going to go to a little bit further of what he just said.
Difficult catch that Cole Taylor made there.
Here we go.
Off of what Bob said, though, how do you deal with the unpredictability of your quarterback? I mean, you want things to be some of his best plays aren't drawn up the way you plan it, and it's some of the bad things that happen. How do you deal with
I think there's good and bad with that.
Yeah.
And so as a play caller, especially in that game on Saturday, you kind of get a feel of – I felt like our best opportunity is just to spread them out and use plays where it's basically 1-2 run. Now, that's not always the best, and so you allow him to be who he is. Now, there's some things that he does that are really frustrating to me, but he also does some things that, like, I'm not coaching him. Like, I can't coach. I can't coach him to break tackles. I'm not there's some things. So I think it's give and take. So I don't get, like, really frustrated. You know what I mean? Like I don't outwardly get frustrated. Like when we decide to do some things, like I know there's going to be some latitude taken by him, and so like I just got to be okay with it. You know, like we got in that 2-minute mode the other day, and I'm like, hey, you know, this is what we're going to run, and if you pull down and run, that's fine. Just get your eyes where they're supposed to be. You know, and the kid makes plays. He's a playmaker that can continue to be better as a passer.
Perfect summation right there of everything I feel like that I talk about, and can be chronicled back 4 years. Is that in 2021, when West Virginia was 2-4, going into a bye week, going nowhere, with an offensive line that was a mess, with Jarrett Deggy, who was not a mobile quarterback, that that Neal Brown had the opportunity right then and there to insert Garrett Green to start getting some experience. Now I get it; it's an outcomes business, but given the latitude and the benefit of the doubt that under then athletic director Shane Lyons had with Neal Brown, giving him that extension after the 2020 season, that you were coming back no matter what. Now, do you want to get back to a bowl game? Absolutely. Yes. And of course, the worst long-term situation happens is that Deggy and West Virginia win against Iowa State in a thriller at the very end, giving him the leash to go a couple of more games. Blown out and look terrible against Oklahoma State at home, a game I went to. And then what do you know? He beats Texas at home at the end. And so at that point in time, you're already through to the end of the regular season, going to a bowl game. You got to stick by him. But then we all, as fans, watched through that guaranteed late bowl against Minnesota that was just an abomination offensively. So then you go into 2022, and again, at this point in time, Garrett Green has been the backup or third string for 2 full seasons. You think, okay, full off season, let's go with him as your starter. No, he gets passed over for JT Daniels. And Brown hanging on, at that point in time, having spent all the NIL money that Country Roads Trust did into JT Daniels, you were going to play him until you couldn't play him. And that's when it happened against Oklahoma. He's playing hurt. His mechanics went to crap, throwing interceptions. You had to give a shot in the arm. So it took almost 3 full seasons for Neal Brown to get over the attitude, the maybe, even let's call it perhaps immaturity at some point, to fit Garrett Green to his scheme of what he wanted to do. So where I'm kind of confused at this point, but again, it is what it is. Why did you recruit the young man in the first place? I mean, it's because you had that relationship from, Troy and coming to West Virginia, and you thought he could be the face of your program years down the road. Well, you're finally here. And I thought in 2023 that was finally Neal Brown, especially toward the end of the season with the Duke's Mayo Bowl, giving Garrett Green the full leash, giving him control of the offense to do, and again, living or dying by how, Garrett Green does. And maybe he is. And I think to give Neal Brown some respect points here is I think that he has not swallowed his pride, not some things, but felt comfortable with giving a little more autonomy to Garrett Green within this offense. He's not going to give him full autonomy. I think that's pretty clear. And I think that is at this point, 34 minutes into this video, that is the key to the rest of this season. And that is the biggest question to summarize this video of how West Virginia is going to do, success or fail, is at what points in times within games, determining the opponent, within the scheme of everything that he talked about with how he calls a game holistically, thinking about defense, thinking about special teams, thinking about not wanting to wear his defense out with how fast West Virginia plays. What I want to say with that, and then also of how creative and how unpredictable that he and Garrett Green are within this offense. Because if an opponent such as an Oklahoma State can't scheme for a Garrett Green taking over a game within a 2-minute structure for a 60-minute structure like he did against Kansas, do it. And that's going to be, the how West Virginia can fight fire versus fire with the defense that it's just trying to survive for this 2024 season. You can't install new players. You're sticking with Jordan Leslie for now, and Shadon Brown in the secondary. It's not like you're going to make wholesale defensive changes. And does that even do you any good with the meat of your schedule being right now? That's up for interpretation. But this he can control. This he can, of giving Garrett Green the autonomy to do what needs to be done for West Virginia to rack up yards and score points. And it infuriates Brown. And I think that is what, at some points in time for 2021 or 2020, 2021, and 2022, that he just was not in a position in which he was going to do so. But now he's in his 5th year. This is it. And if you don't trust Garrett Green to go out there and be your Superman, and like that's where I guess he gives Green credit, is because Green has the talent, the ability to do things that he can't coach for. His manipulating, outside the pocket and improvising, running people over. The first rushing touchdown he had against Kansas, like he knew that he needed to get lower. So whenever he was dealt the blow, that the blow was going to knock him upright. Like he got incredibly low on that like truck, that it knocked him back up straight to rush in. Like that is maturity. That is learning. That is the development within, your offense for years and becoming a better football player. The thing that I think that Garrett Green, I don't like where his limitations begin, is being a short thrower to intermediate thrower from within the pocket. How many knockdowns at the line of scrimmage did Kansas have? Let me pause there, give you what Neal Brown had to say about Garrett Green from passing within the pocket, it seemed like.
The message to Garrett and the coaches, let's figure out how to make Garrett the best version of himself as opposed to being the best quarterback.
Nah, he does some things like if he would consistently do what he's supposed to do with his feet, he would be at a higher completion percentage. And so from a coaching perspective, look, I'm good if he's going to run around. I'm fine with all that. But when the play's in the pocket, let's be fundamentally sound. And so that's what he's got to get better at. Now, he throws the deep ball extremely well. I'm talking about all kinds of different types of deep balls. He throws those really well. But he's got to, in rhythm throws, he's got to make sure his base stays the way it should be.
Great question, because I think this is something that Mountaineer fans like myself and many others have debated, had it out on social media, but, also in person and Neal Brown spoke to this, he's a playmaker first before he is a quarterback. He goes on into this press conference and comparing the differences between Lamar Jackson and Tom Brady and how he sees Garrett Green play more like a Lamar Jackson, obviously because of his rushing ability. But having watched Green enough, and I'm one who spoke throughout the offseason, so I'm not going to say, be a hypocrite and say I didn't necessarily say this, that I thought that the short to intermediate passing game was going to be the difference between Green becoming a letter grade quarterback or staying the same. And after seeing the spring game, after seeing 4 games into this season, is that I don't necessarily think that Garrett Green cares about that. He does, but it's not like he's just going out there trying to make plays, trying to win games. That's what I mean by that. He doesn't have that kind of, like Carson Beck or Jackson Dart or trying to think, like, who are some of those other quarterbacks who have such talent around him, such good offensive minds around him, good as offensive coordinators, good offensive lines who can give him protection from within the pocket. He has wide receivers who can create space and separation, and now he's working on those finer details that when the Mel Kiper Juniors or Todd McShays of the world are nitpicking and dissecting the exactly to what Neal Brown's talking about, the footwork, the body positioning and planting, keeping his eyes, downfield, especially when he's on the move, squaring his shoulders, not looking, keying in on defenders, all of those things that are like those high level, football IQ things that you look for as an NFL draft evaluator. Garrett Green doesn't have that, I don't want to say that ability, but he's not afforded that luxury like some of the quarterbacks at some of the blue blood programs are, because they have competent defenses who can, if you don't pick up a first down, it's not the end of the world. That unfortunately that's the case. If West Virginia, if Garrett Green can't get a first down in the fourth quarter with a 7-point lead or something at that point in time, his defense is going to give up a touchdown and Pitt's going to win the game. So when that happens, and this has happened, happened to Geno Smith at times in 2012, happened, I know, to JT Daniels in 2020 or 2022, is that he's just trying to go out there and not only survive, he's trying to make, playmaker plays to move the change, to score points, to keep West Virginia from within the game. I can be more critical on Garrett Green in games like Cincinnati, when there's obviously a talent discrepancy. This is last year's Cincinnati game. And you're playing at home, Cincinnati's down, can't figure out how to put together an offensive drive, and we can be critical on Garrett Green's footwork and staying cool and calm from within the pocket, having a slow heart rate, taking an extra beat, because he has enough pass protection around him to find the open receiver downfield and throw it with some touch and complete an accurate pass. That's when I can be a little more analytical and critical of Garrett Green in that regard. He doesn't have that right now. And that is where ultimately, at the end of the day, there are so many fans out there who tune into podcasts like mine or many others, and I hear you and I see your comments on social media, is that when you say, like, Neal Brown just needs to unleash Garrett Green and, let him go full blast, I want it to be smart. I do. I really do want it to be smart. I just don't want West Virginia to be predictable. And I know that Brown doesn't want to put Green in situations in which he's risking his, health, because he doesn't want to get Garrett Green beat up. We saw that at points and times of last year, and how sometimes when Nico Marchiol comes into the game, that West Virginia gets even more conservatively. They circle the wagons. They, play like an armadillo, like sucked in, and Marchiol's just not necessarily is able to play at his full go capacity. It's different, I feel like, being a backup quarterback coming off the bench like a pinch hitter. And I think that Marchiol is a good pinch hitter. We saw that in 2022, how he finished the game against Oklahoma State. Of course, the Pitt game and the Texas Tech game, he got the start in the Texas Tech game, but you get what I'm saying, is that there's a different mentality, especially when you have the week's worth of prep with the ones leading up to a game, and how you're able to execute, and whether you're coming off cold off the bench as the backup quarterback. So Brown knows if Garrett Green gets hurt, that West Virginia can't be who it wants to necessarily be, bringing in Nico off the bench. Whether that's accurate or whether that's not, or overstated, and give Nico Marchiol a chance, I'd love to see him and his abilities for 4 quarters. I would love that. But it's just not afforded right now because of where the defense is. I wish that he could have had more time than he got in the Albany game. And, hopefully, perhaps, if Baylor falls apart, that West Virginia can get up multiple scores, play with a lead, so that you can get more playing time for Nico Marchiol. But that's just not necessarily the case right now. This is ride or die with Garrett Green, and Brown doesn't want to get him killed out there. He doesn't want him to have to improvise designed quarterback runs as many as he had last year. I would think that he felt after that, or had a conversation with Green after the Kansas game last week and saying, thank you, great game. That's why he said to the reporters afterwards, we have Garrett Green and they don't, and that makes the difference. But it's almost like a ticking time bomb situation. Where if he continues to take up hits, pile up the hits, those add up over the course of a regular season, and those hits, against some defenses out there are going to feel harder. It's hard to compare defenses right now of who, some of the hits that he took against Penn State, are they comparable to hits he'll take against Oklahoma State, Kansas State, so on and so forth. We don't know that, but it's the reality of the situation. And from playing from within the pocket, Green at his size, unless he's rolling out of the pocket or he's taking a deep drop in which he's going to have that protection from his offensive line, from his running backs who help him chip, especially if there's an outside rush rather than an inside rush, that I don't just know if he's just not tall enough to throw some of those short to intermediate routes over the line of scrimmage. If he's throwing to the boundaries or even just slightly to the hash marks, it might be a different situation, but we need to, if he's capable of doing that more. We haven't seen a whole lot of that. But last week, there was a lot of success, so that's what gives me hope with Garrett Green throwing to Hudson Clement on slant routes with crossing patterns. Like, where was that against Pitt? That's what I'm saying. So I know I've kind of talked a bit in circles for about 47 minutes. So at this point in time, I just want to pause there, kind of summarize, because maybe, you don't know necessarily where I'm going with this is. What's going to determine the rest of the season for West Virginia football, I feel like, because the defense is just kind of a mess, and I don't know if it's going to be fixed with the players that it has in the secondary, especially at cornerback, with its defensive coordinator and its defensive backs coach, who's coaching both safeties and corners. You have an inside linebackers coach. You have a defensive coordinator who's coached linebackers before. You now have an outside linebackers coach. 3 coaches whose specialty defensively, let's call it that, is linebackers, but we only have 1 coach to coach 4 or 5 positions, 3 safeties, 2 corners, and a 3-3-5 scheme. That really makes a lot of sense. So at the end of the day, West Virginia is going to have to score points. It's going to have to score in the high 30s to win games, I feel like, or if it can score in the 40s, the 50s. And with the way that games, because of the accelerated clock on first downs, doesn't work like the games, that they used to, that West Virginia can afford to go up tempo for 4 quarters. It can. And it will Neal Brown let it. It can, because of how fast the clock moves. Yes, you put your defense on the field for more snaps than perhaps that he feels comfortable with, but who cares if you're scoring points? Because that's the only way that this defense can see success. If it continues to have the quarterback pressure rate that it's had, which is one of the best in the country, and create more tackles for loss and sacks, TJ Jackson being awesome in that regard, Tyron Bradley, and forced turnovers. Absolutely. And then the offense has to, on the opposite side, score points, play with a lead. And unfortunately, Neal Brown hasn't shown that into now 6 seasons, that West Virginia can win enough by double digits or more against Power 4 competition, Power 5, Power 4, however you want to say it, comparatively to Dana Holgorsen, comparatively to Rich Rodriguez. The way he can do that, and to go up tempo, to score points, to do exactly what we're talking about, is to unleash Garrett Green. And to play smart, to play controlled, Green to take care of himself. I think that they need to talk all game long. They have these helmet communications now. They need to talk all night long. Play smart here. If you want to go and take off, you can do so, but play smart here and not get yourself killed in different first down versus third down, your side of the field, your opponent's side of the field, red zone, and be smart situationally about when to take points, when to go for it, and to give more autonomy to let let Russ cook. In the case of Russell Wilson, you're going to just have to let Garrett Green cook. And if it's a failure, if it ultimately all falls apart, then you tried, you took your best shot. But playing this type of conservative, we're going to try and win in the fourth quarter, wear opponents down, pick up or have long sustaining drives, picking up multiple first downs, using a lot of clock, keeping defenses on the field. I just don't know if it works. I just don't know if it's going to work this year. And West Virginia needs, Neal Brown needs to get back into the good graces, I feel like, of Mountaineer Nation after losing the Backyard Brawl. And the only way to do so is to win. How do you win? It's scoring points. So what do you think about my thoughts here? I know I've almost gone 51 minutes, and maybe I've rambled a little bit, but wanted to talk about this press conference because I think those few little snippets there told a full circle story about where West Virginia needs to go from here. So happy bye week. Thanks for tuning in at this point in time. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell your dog that I do this each and every week and have a lot of fun doing it. We'll be back later this week to preview Oklahoma State, and it's going to be a fun one next weekend as we get into the thick of it with Big 12 play. So hail West Virginia. Let's go.